Hi friends, this is Anders Ibsen with Windermere Professional Partners, managing broker of Anders Ibsen Homes. Here with my good friend Lindsay Lundholm, owner of Sterling Home Inspections. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So tell me more about your company. What do you do?
Well, we do home inspections. Sterling Inspection Group has been doing that for about 25 years, and we've seen I think over 20,000 homes now, and so that's quite a lot. We've expanded though, and we offer other home services. That's a really fun part of the business now, is helping people take care of their home.
Absolutely. So it's a real sign of the times that I have to say this, but a home inspection is a really important thing to have when you're buying a home, and you should always do it in some form, no matter how competitive the purchase is. Not only are you looking at a significant purchase, probably the biggest financial decision that you make in your life, but you're also looking at expenses in the form of maintenance. So regardless of what kind of home you're buying, whether it's more of a vintage home like a Craftsman or maybe a modern townhouse, for instance, you want to walk in eyes wide open so that you're not caught unawares with expensive maintenance projects. You want to make sure that you're an informed homeowner. But not all homes are created equal. So for example, Lindsay, if we're talking about older homes that were built maybe more of the turn of the century, Victorians, Craftsman style homes, maybe more fancy colonial or Tudor homes, for instance, what would you say are some of the biggest inspection issues that buyers should be aware of when they're deciding whether or not to purchase it?
Good question. So when we're looking at those older homes, obviously they've seen a lot of years on them. So we're looking at foundation and settling, like that's a huge piece that we want to look at. We're seeing issues there just because if they're still standing, obviously they're still there, but there might be issues with the foundation that we want to take a look at. We are going to look at the electrical, right? Because it's significantly old compared to modern electrical systems now. Sometimes we might run into that knob and tube wiring, and we just want to make sure that it's all safe and functioning properly. The electrical load then is very different than now, right? I mean, we weren't charging cell phones and laptops.
They didn't have Teslas in 1900.
Yeah, all of those things. So it was okay then, but with the use now, we want to modernize that so it can carry the load that we place on it.
And increasingly, what we're also running into, besides safety concerns with things like wiring, is also home insurance, because home insurance companies are increasingly getting pickier about whether they will even insure a home at all if it has older components like knob and tube. So walking in eyes wide open and making sure that you either have the ability to negotiate or, worst case, find a different house, that can be really crucial. You don't want to waive your inspection buying a 100-year-old home and only to discover later that if there's something terrible that happened, like a house fire, then you're completely out of luck. So always be informed in that respect. When it comes to foundations, Lindsay, what would you say are the biggest conducive conditions that could lead to foundation problems down the road, or could be good red flags or indicators? I've heard that drainage, for example, like if there's a lot of water pooling near the foundation, that can have a really bad long-term effect on the stability of the house's structure as a whole. How does that work?
Right, we live in Washington State, right?
It rains.
So moisture is always something that we talk about with every era of home, but with the foundation, you want proper drainage, and we want the water going away from the house and not creating those cracks, and houses are gonna settle, but water just adds to the complication of, foundations holding up that house, so.
Very good. So when it comes to homes that are old, homes that we would consider classic, it's all completely relative, right? I mean, if you talk to a European and you say, I have a 100-year-old home, it's historical, then you'll just get laughed at. But there are very real differences in construction practices and materials based on certain eras of construction. So for example, there are some pretty key differences between, say, a 1950s post-war bungalow and a 1920s Craftsman, for example, even though they are only maybe a few decades apart in age of construction. So when your team looks at, say, that middle tier of post-war to maybe 1970s construction, are there unique issues that you find there?
There are some differences. So when we talk about electrical, we're seeing aluminum wiring, Federal Pacific and Zinsco panels are recalled, so we always point those things out.
And those started being built in houses around the time, right? Like 50s, 60s?
Right. So also we're still in a low amp situation, right? 120 amps is kind of where we're still at in that time frame, where now we're seing common 200 amp in a home. It's just different.
The wiring just wasn't built for today's modern loads. So I'm detecting a common theme here of electrical issues, and that's really a health and safety concern more than anything, because today's houses just have higher electrical usage, higher loads on the wires compared to what homes were just built in anticipation for back in the 1900s or the 1950s. But besides electrical, tell me more about plumbing, one of the other really big expensive line items that home maintenance projects can include. My understanding is that in the middle of the 20th century, something known as galvanized plumbing became a little bit more prevalent, and you can see that in a lot of older homes, and it can sometimes be a bit of a problem. What is galvanized plumbing? What are the issues with it?
So galvanized plumbing was just a cheaper method, right? They went to this metal product that they could get in a cheaper way.
That's because copper was scarce during like the Korean War and the Cold War era, right? So that builders just needed cheaper metal, basically.
They needed cheaper metal, and they've put a protective layer of zinc on that to make it last, but doesn't do so over time, right? It can corrode and start to break down. So that's what we're finding, and what we want to, you're starting to see that replaced, and that's what an inspection can help you know. Did it get replaced, or does it need replaced today?
And one of the telltale signs is just really weak water pressure, right? Like if you're in your main fixtures, like in the kitchen or the bathroom, and if your water pressure trickles to nothing, and especially if you can see what looks like galvanized plumbing, just iron-looking pipes that have a lot of rust, ferrous coloring around the where the pipes meet, for example, that's usually a sign that your plumbing is on its last legs in your house, wouldn't you say?
I would agree with that, yeah.
Now, speaking of plumbing, talk to me about the $10,000 question known as side sewers, because that's what a brand new side sewer can cost sometimes. So in older neighborhoods like Tacoma, what are some of the biggest challenges that you find with older side sewers, and what kinds of materials do you tend to have with older side sewers, and what are the biggest problems that you can find as a home buyer if you run a sewer scope?
Good question. So, here in Tacoma, we're seeing cast iron, clay pipes. We find that. Occasionally we might run into Orangeburg. Just older materials that are breaking down. And so it's important to look at those sewer lines. When you think about looking at your whole home, sometimes we forget about the sewer line that takes sewage out to the city main, and that's still a part of home ownership, is taking care of that line that is on your property.
It's mostly roots. Wouldn't you say that roots are probably the biggest issue that affects older sewer systems? Is trees like sewage, it's plant food, basically. Yeah, exactly. And they tend to be attracted to those pipes, and that can lead to those pipes being broken apart or at least suffering severe blockage, right?
Correct.
So how do plumbers fix it?
Well, plumbers got to dig it up and replace it sometimes, right? So that's where our cost comes in if we're having to replace an entire line.
If there's significant blockage.
Yeah, if there's significant. We can jet the line and have that, clean out a line. What we're finding where there's a mature growth in trees, right, is that root intrusion has either broken up the line, or the roots are clogging the line from flowing nicely. And so if we just simply jet the line, clear it out, that may take care of it. Hopefully we're not having to dig up the yard and have to replace the whole line. Something that's also really common that you might not think of is what we call fog, fats, oils, and grease. We find that in almost every sewer line. We cook, we eat, we send things down the sink, and just slowly over time blocks that line. So that's really common, and actually the thing we find the most.
So when there's something that's just a mild blockage, maybe some kitchen grease, for example, maybe just a high-pressured jetting of the side sewer can be sufficient, and usually that's only several $100s, which in terms of plumbing, that's really cheap. But what you're saying is that if the line has just been let go for so long, no one has paid any attention to it, and those tree roots or other blockages or other problems with the sewer have compounded so badly over the years that there's just no choice but to have to excavate and put in a liner or a new side sewer, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
And how much does the sewer scope cost?
$300.
So wouldn't you pay $300 to save maybe $12,000, which I've seen on some inspection responses is the cost of a brand new sewer section along with city permitting and taking as much as 1 to 2 weeks to get done. So doing your due diligence is extremely important with older homes like that. That's all well and good for older homes that are mid-century or more vintage era, but let's talk a little bit more about modern homes comparatively, homes that were maybe built in the 1980s up until now, newer homes. So if I'm buying a home that was built in the 1990s, why do we need a home inspection? It's modern. It has modern plumbing. It doesn't have that scary knob and tube wiring, for example. What's the point of an inspection for a more modern home that was built maybe only 20 or 30 years ago?
Right, well, only 20 or 30 years ago, it's seen its first life cycle, right? About every 25 years, that's the life cycle of home systems and even your roof. So whether you have a 30-year shingle on your roof, we're looking at roofs in a big way, and does it need replaced? Was it taken care of really well, or is it time to get a new one?
Right, so that modern home potentially could have its original roof on it, or maybe other original components to the home which haven't been remodeled and are maybe on their last legs and in need of total replacement, perhaps.
Speaking of remodels, that is an excellent home to inspect. We want to look at, did they just put lipstick on the pig, or did they really do a good job, and what components needed replaced rather than just painted over or just so to speak. So
now talk to me about siding, because around this time period, around like the 80s to 90s, my understanding is there was a now recalled product, or if not recalled, it was the basis of a class action lawsuit called composite LP. And this was basically a type of siding that it's mostly waste product from sawmills, right? But you see it a lot in 80s and 90s homes. And tell me more about the challenges that you can sometimes see with composite siding, with that vintage of homes.
Right, so if it's not properly installed, or it's susceptible to moisture, and we live in Washington, so we're seeing warping on that, and it's just not as superior a product as we have now with hardy plank siding, and moisture is kind of the enemy of all things here in homes.
Your home really does not like water. Yes.
So that's what we're really finding, is we just want to know that it was installed properly, and is it holding up, right? Or has moisture affected it today?
Yeah, because a home that's so-called modern is really 30 or 40 years old, and by that point you'll know if something is failing or has already failed. And for what it's worth, a re-side of your home, if your siding has failed and needs to be replaced, then I've seen bids in the realm of $50,000 3 years ago, so account for inflation and round up. You should check your siding out, among other things. We've talked about modern homes, but there's one little bonus piece of content left, and that is new construction, homes that are brand new or maybe even in the process of being built. And unfortunately, what some buyers think, much to their detriment maybe years down the road, is what's the point of a home inspection? It's new. What's going to be wrong with it? So, Lindsay, why would you inspect a brand new home, or a home that is not even quite yet built yet? Well, what's the point of it? It's new. Why would I have to worry?
Right, everything's brand new, so you think it should work just fine. But what we've found is with modern building practices, everything's very segmented. So we have multiple subs coming and going, and they're not necessarily a cohesive team building this house that should be, one structure.
So instead of like one builder with a single team under the same roof, no pun intended,
yeah.
You have just an electrician doing their thing, a plumber doing their thing, a drywaller doing their thing, and maybe they're working in concert, or maybe they're just getting in each other's way, is what you're saying?
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
one team did this, and it creates a problem for the next one coming in, and they just come in and want to get the job done, and there's not this oversight between the subs always. So having an inspection where we can kind of be that oversight, did everything get put in correctly in the way that it should be, according to the manufacturer or whatever system is operating.
Yeah, it's always a good idea. You never want to take these things for granted. And a point on pre-sales, and a pre-sale means that you're buying the home that hasn't quite been finished with its construction process yet, even though you're using forms that are frankly written by the builder's lawyer, so they're not quite the most consumer friendly. There are often provisions where the buyer can have experts like home inspectors walk through the property and investigate the construction practices and make sure that it was built correctly. And if it wasn't built properly, then you can hold the builder accountable and have them fix things before you get your certificate of occupancy and before you move in. And so that's so crucial. If you skip that step, if you don't have an expert fighting for you, then you're walking in blind. And if you don't have that expert putting eyes on your most important asset, then you could just be in 1 or 2 years later down the road, and you could have a leak in your roof, or you could have a failed sewer, or something awful like that that cost you tens of thousands of dollars potentially that you did not budget for. So don't skip the $700 or $900 expense that could cost you $20 or $30 or $50,000 down the road. Do your diligence, even with new construction. But here's the thing, regardless of what era of home construction you're buying, the fact remains that it's a competitive market, and sometimes you have to compete against other buyers who don't have the same caution that you do. Maybe they're just trying to buy the home and they don't see the point of a home inspection, and you can be seemingly at a competitive disadvantage. So a lot of buyers just figure that to win the home they have to skip the inspection and they'll just deal with the consequences later. They'll just roll the dice with buying a house, which, how does that make sense? So what does your company offer, Lindsay, to maybe help these buyers compete more effectively against other buyers who just don't care about their due diligence? How can you help them compete in like a bidding war type of situation, regardless of if it's an old home or a new home?
That's a good question. So we offer a few different inspection types. So you're in a really competitive market, maybe your time frame is really short, and so we offer something called just the big stuff. We're going to get in there and look at the 5 major components. So it's quick, it's fast, it can get in on a showing time. We also offer next day, right? Like we're just trying to get you scheduled fast, because a lot of it is about you responding in a fast-paced market.
So real quick, Lindsay, when your company looks with this more expedited inspection to give the buyer a really fast timeline for being competitive, what are those 5 big things that they should look at?
So we're looking at the roof and attic, we're looking at the plumbing, we're looking at the electrical panel, we're going in the crawl space, and we're looking at the water heater.
So those are the biggest points of failure and things that you don't want to go wrong.
Commonly those are some of the big items people always have questions on. Water heater is maybe not the largest, but one that is always asked about. So we be sure to throw that in there.
Now, something that a lot of people don't necessarily use, but can be the difference between winning the house or not, is what's called a pre-inspection, which is instead of trying to win the house first and compete against 5 other people, some of whom might be waiving their home inspection, and so how do you compete against that? A lot of motivated buyers have teams, like from Lindsay's company, actually inspect the house. You can get the written permission of the seller to do this, and you can inspect the house with a full home inspection, or even just an expedited, just the big stuff style of inspection, prior to writing your offer. And then you're informed about everything to do with the house. You know what you're getting into, but you can still be competitive, and your offer can be just as strong as a buyer who has waived their inspection. Is that something that your team does too?
Definitely. So pre-offer inspections, as we refer to them, gives you that competitive advantage. You still get to do the due diligence, and then when you submit your offer, you've basically waived your inspection in the time frame, right? You've done it pre-offer. So I think it's a smart way to do it. You can do it full home inspection, you can get the sewer inspection in there, whatever you'd like, but then you know, this is good, I want to make an offer.
And you said next day, so potentially you could be working with someone, you fall in love with the house, there's an offer review date in a couple of days, and your team could be out there in the next day potentially to look at the house and inform the buyer if they want to move forward with that. Is that right?
That's right.
So don't leave home without one. Home inspections, I mean. So regardless, whether we're talking about a home that's big or small, old or new, I think we can all agree that knowing everything that we can about your most important, your biggest financial investment is crucial. So regardless of if you're already under contract and you want to have an inspection to negotiate with the seller, or if it's super competitive and you just want to know what you're getting into, or maybe you're not even buying at all, maybe you're already a homeowner and you just want to get ahead on your home project list, working with a skilled, local, nuanced home inspection team that understands all the components of a house and understands and is sensitive to the different eras of home construction couldn't be more important. It's probably one of the most important decisions that you make when making this kind of decision. So once again, thank you so much for watching. Keep the questions coming about homes, the marketplace, or anything else that piques your interest. And thank you again, Lindsay, for joining us. This is Ibsen from Windermere Professional Partners. Thanks for watching.